Sir, you need to move. First class is not for people like you." The words came out sharp and cold, no hesitation, just pure judgment wrapped in a smile. Victoria Sterling stood over Marcus Webb in seat 1. Her blonde hair pulled back in a perfect French twist, pearl earrings catching the cabin light. She was 38, 15 years with Sovereign Sky Airways, and she ran first class like it was hers. Her designer uniform fitted perfectly, the blazer tailored to emphasize her figure, the skirt hemline strategic. Everything about her screamed polished authority. She looked at the black man in the gray hoodie and decided right then he didn't belong. Marcus Webb, 41 years old, sat quietly with a black backpack at his feet and a tablet in his hands. His hoodie was slightly worn at the cuffs. His jeans were dark but casual. His white sneakers had seen better days. No Rolex on his wrist, no Italian leather briefcase. Just calm eyes that had seen this scenario before. What Victoria didn't know was that in exactly 2 minutes Marcus would buy the entire airline she worked for. And in 6 hours she'd be in FBI custody facing federal charges that would destroy her life. Before we dive into this, tell me where you're watching from. Comment your city below. And if this moment stops you in your tracks the way it stopped the passengers around them, hit that subscribe button and smash that like. You're not going to believe what happens next. Now, let's rewind to how this disaster started. London Heathrow Airport Terminal 5. Rain hammered against the massive glass windows, typical London grey, soaking the runway outside. But inside the first-class lounge of Sovereign Sky Airways, the air was still and smelled of expensive coffee and old money. Marcus sat in the far corner away from the buffet and the bar. To anyone watching, he looked like a man who'd gotten lost on his way to a backpacker's hostel. He typed furiously on his tablet headphones around his neck, completely focused. There was no designer luggage beside him. No entourage, no business suit announcing his importance. Just a battered black backpack and an intensity in his eyes that most people missed entirely. Marcus Webb was the founder of Webb Capital Group, a private equity firm that specialized in distressed assets. In the financial world, they called him the Reaper. He didn't just buy failing companies. He acquired them, restructured them completely, and rebuilt them from the ground up. He had turned struggling manufacturers into industry leaders, saved dying retail chains, and resurrected bankrupt airlines. Today, he wasn't flying private. His jet was grounded for emergency maintenance in Geneva. He'd booked a last-minute commercial seat 1A on Sovereign Sky Flight 447 to New York, JFK, simply because it was the most convenient option. He stood up, slinging his backpack over one shoulder, and walked toward the gate. "Priority boarding for first and business class only," the gate agent announced, her voice clipped and professional. Marcus moved toward the priority lane. Ahead of him, a man in a pinstriped suit was ushered through with a warm smile and a pleasant greeting. When Marcus reached the podium, the agent didn't look up from her screen. She simply held up one hand. "Sir, economy boarding begins in 20 minutes. Please wait in the general seating area." Marcus didn't blink. He held out his boarding pass without a word. "I'm in 1A." The agent looked up. Her eyes scanned his hoodie, then his face, then the backpack. A flicker of annoyance crossed her features. She took the pass, expecting an error, expecting to send him away. The machine beeped green. Priority confirmed. She frowned, handing it back without making eye contact, denying him even that basic courtesy. Marcus didn't care. He was used to being underestimated. It was his greatest tactical advantage. He walked down the jet bridge, the cold, damp air of the tunnel seeping through his clothes. He stepped onto the plane and turned left toward first class. That's where he met Victoria Sterling. And that's where everything changed. Victoria was adjusting a flower arrangement near the galley when Marcus entered the first-class cabin. She had been with Sovereign Sky for 15 years, and every single one of those years had etched itself into the lines around her eyes. but she covered them well with careful makeup that highlighted her high cheekbones and made her look younger than 38. Her uniform wasn't standard issue. It was custom-tailored, fitted at the waist, the skirt cut to show just enough leg to be noticed, but not unprofessional. Her nails were manicured a soft pink that matched the subtle gloss on her lips. She wore the same perfume every flight, something French and expensive that she bought duty-free and considered part of her brand. She considered the first-class cabin her personal kingdom. She curated it. She protected it. And she despised anything that disrupted its carefully maintained aesthetic. She saw the hoodie first. "Excuse me," Victoria said, her voice dripping with sickeningly sweet venom. "You're going the wrong way. Economy is to the right, through the galley." Marcus stopped. He looked at her name tag gleaming under the harsh cabin lights. "Victoria." His voice was a deep baritone, calm and level. "I'm in seat 1A. Victoria let out a short, sharp sigh, barely concealing an eye roll. Her perfectly shaped eyebrows arched slightly, her mouth pressing into a thin line of practiced patience that wasn't patient at all. "Let me see your ticket." Marcus held out his boarding pass. Victoria took it between two fingers like it might contaminate her manicured nails. She stared at it, looking for something wrong, anything that would confirm her assumptions. "Marcus Webb," she read aloud, her tone implying the name sounded made up like he'd invented it on the spot. She pulled out her tablet and checked the manifest with slow, deliberate movements. "Seat 1, A. Paid in full. Full fare ticket. No upgrades. No miles. Just a straight purchase of the most expensive seat on the plane." Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Fine," she snapped, pointing a manicured finger toward the seat. "Put your bag in the overhead bin, and try not to disturb Mr. Harrington in 1B. He's a frequent flyer." The emphasis was crystal clear. "He belongs here. You do not." Marcus said nothing. He lifted his backpack into the overhead compartment with easy strength and settled into seat 1A. The leather was soft, the seat wide, the legroom generous. He buckled his seatbelt and pulled out his tablet. In seat 1B sat Charles Harrington, 62 years old, white with silver hair swept back from a tanned face. His pinstriped suit probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. A watch the size of a small cookie gleamed on his wrist, all gold and complications. He glanced at Marcus with the kind of look that said he'd made an assessment and filed it away without much interest. Near the galley, a young flight attendant stood frozen, watching the exchange with wide eyes. Elena Rodriguez was 26, Hispanic, with dark hair pulled into a tight bun and nervous hands that kept adjusting her uniform. She'd been flying for exactly 4 months and was still on probation. Every shift felt like a test she might fail at any moment. Victoria leaned close to Elena and whispered something, her lips barely moving. Then she laughed, a cruel, sharp sound that carried just far enough for Marcus to hear. Elena's face flushed. She looked down at her shoes. Marcus closed his eyes. He wasn't angry. Not yet. He was calculating, observing, collecting data. The boarding process continued. More passengers filed in, filling the seats around him. The heavy door sealed with a pressurized thunk, and the aircraft pushed back from the gate. The safety video played on every screen, ignored by everyone who'd seen it 1,000 times. As the plane climbed toward cruising altitude, the cabin lights dimmed slightly and the service began. First-class service on Sovereign Sky was supposed to be a choreographed ballet of hot towels, chilled champagne, and whispered attentiveness. Victoria moved through the cabin with practiced elegance, her smile turning on and off like a switch depending on who she was serving. She stopped beside Charles Harrington in 1B, her smile blooming warm and genuine. "Mr. Harrington, so wonderful to see you again. How was Scotland?" Harrington looked up from his newspaper, his face creasing into a pleased smile. "Victoria, you remembered. The golf was spectacular. St. Andrews never disappoints. I can only imagine Victoria cooed pouring vintage Dom Perignon into his crystal flute with a flourish. She touched his shoulder lightly as she laughed at something he said, her fingers lingering just a moment longer than necessary. When she reached Marcus in 1A, the smile vanished. It was like watching a light switch flip off. Her face went neutral, her eyes cold. "Drink?" she asked. "No, sir. No pleasantries. Not even a menu presented." Marcus looked up from his tablet, stylus in hand. "Sparkling water, please." Victoria's lips pressed together. "We're out of sparkling." The lie was so casual, so automatic, that it almost sounded believable. Except the bottle of sparkling water sat on her cart 3 feet away, clearly visible, the label facing forward. Marcus looked at the bottle. Then he looked at her. His expression didn't change. "Tap is fine." Victoria reached for a plastic jug of water and poured it into a glass, filling it to the absolute brim, the meniscus trembling at the edge. She set it down on his tray table with a heavy thud. The water sloshed over the rim, spilling across the tray, soaking the edge of Marcus's tablet and dripping onto his jeans. "Oops," Victoria said. Deadpan. Flat, without an ounce of apology. She didn't offer a napkin. She didn't even pause. She just turned and continued down the aisle, like nothing had happened. Marcus quickly lifted his tablet, wiping the screen on his sleeve. Water dripped from the corner, a few drops hitting the leather seat. "Could I get a towel, please?" Victoria glanced back over her shoulder, her face a mask of irritated inconvenience. "I'm busy serving the other guests. Maybe if you hadn't brought so much junk onto the tray, it wouldn't have spilled." Marcus froze. The sheer audacity was almost fascinating. He'd encountered hostile board members, corrupt politicians, cartel leaders negotiating in bad faith. But the petty tyranny of Victoria Sterling was something unique, something almost pure in its smallness. "My junk," Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave, "is a merger agreement worth $3 billion, and you just poured water on it." Victoria scoffed, a short, sharp sound of disbelief. "Oh, please. You think because you scraped together enough miles for an upgrade you can talk to me like that? I know your type. You think the world owes you something?" Her voice was getting louder. Passengers in the rows behind were starting to turn their heads, sensing drama, smelling blood in the water. Marcus unbuckled his seatbelt. He stood up. He wasn't physically imposing, not tall or broad-shouldered, but there was a presence about him that usually made people step back instinctively. "I need to speak to the captain." Victoria stepped directly into his personal space, blocking the narrow aisle with her body. "Sit down. The seatbelt sign is on." Marcus pointed at the ceiling. The seatbelt sign light was off, had been off for 10 minutes. "It's not." Victoria's face flushed red. "I said sit down," she shouted. Heads turned throughout the cabin. Charles Harrington lowered his newspaper. His eyebrows raised. Elena stood frozen in the galley, a pair of tongs in her hands, her mouth slightly open. Marcus tried to step past Victoria toward the galley, intending to find the in-flight service director and file a formal complaint. As he moved, his shoulder brushed hers. It was glancing contact unavoidable in the narrow aisle, the kind of incidental touch that happens 100 times on every flight. Victoria reacted like she'd been assaulted. She shrieked a theatrical high-pitched noise that cut through the cabin like a siren. "Don't you touch me!" And then she did it. Her hand lashed out. It wasn't a push, it wasn't a defensive gesture. It was a slap. A full-force open-palm strike across Marcus's left cheek. Crack. The sound was sickeningly loud in the enclosed space. Marcus's head snapped to the side. A collective gasp swept through the first-class cabin like a wave. Even Elena, standing 20 feet away in the galley, made a small noise of shock and dropped the tongs. They clattered against the metal counter. Marcus stood there, his left cheek stinging, a red handprint rapidly forming on his dark skin, visible even in the dim cabin lighting. He slowly turned his head back to face Victoria. He didn't raise his hand. He didn't yell. He didn't call her names or threaten her. He simply reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "You struck a passenger," Marcus said quietly. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of documented fact. Victoria's eyes went wide for just a fraction of a second. Then survival instinct kicked in and she pivoted to defense mode, her voice rising to a scream. "You assaulted a crew member. I'm having you arrested the second we land. Captain Hayes." Captain Robert Hayes emerged from the cockpit looking annoyed at being interrupted during cruise. He was 54 years old, a large man with a red face and thinning hair combed over a growing bald spot. He'd been flying for Sovereign Sky for 12 years, and he carried himself with the entitled confidence of a man who believed the cockpit made him untouchable. He saw Victoria first, standing in the aisle with her hand pressed to her chest, breathing hard, her face flushed. Then he saw Marcus standing calmly with a phone in his hand and a red handprint blooming on his cheek. "What is going on here?" Hayes demanded, his voice booming with authority. Victoria didn't hesitate. The tears came instantly springing to her eyes with practiced ease. "He hit me," she said, her voice trembling with manufactured trauma. "He tried to push past me, grabbed my arm, and when I tried to defend myself, she gestured at Marcus like he was something dangerous, something to be contained." Captain Hayes opened his mouth to respond, but another voice cut through the tension. "Roger." It was Charles Harrington in seat 1B. He'd set down his newspaper and was looking directly at the captain with the calm authority of a man used to being listened to. "I saw it." The man did nothing. She slapped him across the face. Hayes looked at Harrington, a high-value customer whose name appeared on frequent flyer lists and executive reports. Then he looked at Marcus, the man in the hoodie with the scuffed sneakers. The bias was visible in his eyes, clear as day. Assumptions calcified into decisions in real time. "Sit down," Sir Hayes barked at Marcus, "or I will have you restrained in flex cuffs. We are diverting to Gander. You're going to jail." Marcus looked at the captain. His expression didn't change. He checked his watch. 2:14 p.m. "You're making a mistake," Marcus said softly. "You have 2 minutes to correct it." Hayes stepped forward, puffing out his chest. "Is that a threat?" "It's a courtesy." The cabin was no longer just watching. It was recording. A woman in row 3, Indian, maybe early 30s, had her phone out. The camera pointed directly at Marcus and Victoria. Her hands were steady, her face serious. A white man in row 4 leaned over to his wife and whispered something. She whispered back, her eyes wide. Elena stood in the galley, her face pale, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. She'd seen everything. She knew Victoria had lied. But she also knew what happened to probationary flight attendants who contradicted senior crew. She'd fail her evaluation. She'd lose her job. She had student loans that would bury her. She said nothing. Charles Harrington, however, leaned back in his seat and crossed his arms, his expression one of disgusted disappointment. He'd flown first class on dozens of airlines for 30 years. He'd seen service decline, seen crews cut corners, seen management ignore problems until they became disasters. But he'd never seen anything quite this blatant. Marcus stood in the aisle, phone in hand, his cheek still burning from the slap. Captain Hayes glared at him with the kind of rage that comes from feeling challenged in front of subordinates. "You have 2 minutes, Marcus repeated. His voice was calm, almost gentle, but there was something underneath it, something cold and absolute that made the captain's face twitch. Hayes turned and stormed back toward the cockpit. Victoria stood in the aisle, her chest heaving, her eyes darting between Marcus and the other passengers. For just a moment, uncertainty flickered across her face. Then she squared her shoulders, smoothed her skirt, and walked to the galley where Elena was standing. Call it in, Victoria hissed at the younger woman. Tell ground operations we have a violent passenger. I want police waiting when we land. Elena's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Victoria. I saw Victoria's eyes went hard. You saw a passenger assault me. That's what you saw. Unless you want to spend the rest of your career in economy on regional flights to nowhere, you'll back me up. Elena looked down at her hands. She said nothing. Marcus walked slowly back to seat 1A. He sat down, buckled his seatbelt, looked out the window at the vast blue ocean 36,000 feet below. Then he unlocked his phone. He didn't dial 911. He didn't call a lawyer. He didn't scroll through contacts looking for someone to complain to. He opened an app that looked like a standard banking interface, except the numbers were moving too fast, updating in real time with market data from exchanges around the world. He pressed a contact named simply Arthur. The plane was still cruising smoothly, but the atmosphere in first class was poisonous. Victoria was in the galley loudly recounting her version of events to Elena, making sure her voice carried. Hayes had returned to the cockpit to begin diversion protocols, already calculating fuel and filing reports with air traffic control. Marcus put the phone to his ear. Marcus, a crisp, efficient voice, answered immediately. Arthur Caldwell, his chief of operations, a man who'd been with Webb Capital since the beginning. I thought you were in the air. Everything okay? Marcus's voice was completely devoid of emotion. Arthur, what is Sovereign Sky Airways trading at? There was a pause. The sound of rapid typing. Sovereign ticker SVSK. They're struggling. Trading at 11.20. They've missed earnings 3 quarters in a row. Stock's been sliding for 18 months. Why buy it? Arthur choked on whatever he'd been drinking. Buy what? The airline. Controlling stake. I want 51%. Marcus, that's... Arthur paused, clearly pulling up numbers on his screen. That's a $180 million expenditure. We'd need board approval for something that large, and I am the board. Marcus interrupted. His voice was quiet, but absolute. Use the emergency liquidity fund from the Cayman accounts. Do it now, Arthur. You have 60 seconds. There was a long pause. Arthur had worked with Marcus long enough to know that when his voice went flat like that, when emotion drained completely away, something significant had happened. Marcus, are you sure? This is an airline with aging fleet, pension obligations, union issues? I'm sitting on one of their planes, Marcus said, touching his burning cheek with his free hand. I'm conducting an on-site inspection. The management is severely lacking. Arthur's tone shifted immediately, snapping into the military precision of a man executing orders. Okay. Executing now. I'm sweeping the floor. Give me 2 minutes. Marcus didn't hang up. He watched the flight map on the screen in front of him. The small airplane icon representing their position over the Atlantic. He watched it begin to bank slightly left. Hayes was turning them toward Canada. Marcus Arthur's voice came back slightly breathless. We've cleared the market. We just triggered a trading suspension on the London Stock Exchange due to volatility. We acquired 53% of the voting shares as of right now. Congratulations, you own an airline. Good, Marcus said. Now patch me through to the CEO of Sovereign Sky, Jonathan Whitmore. Tell him his new chairman is on Flight 447 and he's currently being kidnapped by his own employee. On it. 2 minutes later, the SAT phone in the cockpit rang. It wasn't the standard radio frequency for air traffic control. It was the emergency satellite communication line reserved for high-level company emergencies, the kind of line that almost never rang unless something catastrophic was happening. Captain Hayes picked it up, expecting operations to confirm the diversion coordinates. This is Hayes, he grunted into the receiver. Captain Hayes. A voice boomed through the line. It wasn't operations. It was Jonathan Whitmore, the CEO of Sovereign Sky Airways, and he sounded absolutely terrified. Mr. Whitmore, I'm afraid we have a security incident on board. I'm diverting to Gander to... You will not divert." Whitmore screamed so loud that Hayes actually pulled the phone away from his ear. "You will maintain your heading to New York. If you touch that yoke, Hayes, I will personally strip the wings off your uniform." Hayes was stunned into silence. His mouth opened and closed. "Sir, I don't understand." "A passenger assaulted a crew member. I have to." "That passenger?" Whitmore interrupted, his voice shaking with barely controlled panic. "Just bought this company." "You idiot. He owns the plane you're flying. He owns the fuel in the tanks. He owns the headset you're wearing. He is Marcus Webb, and he is currently on the line with the Federal Aviation Administration and my board of directors." Hayes felt the blood drain from his face. His hand went numb. He looked through the small window in the cockpit door. He could see seat 1A. Marcus Webb was looking right at him, making direct eye contact across the length of the cabin. Marcus raised his glass of water in a slow, deliberate mock toast. "Go back there," Whitmore ordered, his voice dropping to something cold and final. "Apologize. Do whatever he says. If he wants to fly the plane, you let him fly it. If he wants you to serve him peanuts on your knees, you do it. Do you understand me, Captain?" "Yes," Hayes whispered. "Yes, sir." He hung up. His hands were trembling. He turned to his co-pilot, David Park, a 35-year-old Korean-American who'd been sitting in confused silence through the entire exchange. "Cancel the diversion," Hayes said quietly. "Resume course to JFK." Park's eyes widened. "Captain, if there's a violent passenger—" "There's no violent passenger," Hayes said. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. Just get us back on course." He stood, adjusted his hat with shaking hands, and opened the cockpit door. Victoria was waiting for him in the galley, a smug expression on her face. She'd heard the announcement about diverting and assumed everything was going her way. "Is the police escort ready for New York?" she asked loudly, making sure Marcus could hear her voice. "I want him arrested the second we land." Hayes walked right past her without even glancing in her direction. He walked straight to seat 1A. The entire first-class cabin watched in absolute silence. Harrington watched. Elena watched. The woman with the phone in row 3 was still filming. Hayes stopped in front of Marcus. The captain, a man of ego and bluster who'd spent 12 years believing the cockpit made him king, looked like a deflated balloon. Mr. Webb." Hayes stammered. Marcus didn't look up from his tablet. His stylus moved across the screen, annotating a document. "Captain, why are we banking left New York is straight ahead." "Correction," Sir Hayes said quickly. "We are back on course." Victoria's jaw literally dropped. Her perfectly made-up face went slack with shock. "Captain, what are you doing?" "He hit me." Hayes spun on her with a fury she'd never seen before. "Silence," he roared. "One more word out of you, Sterling, and you're fired before we touch the ground." Victoria recoiled like she'd been physically struck. Her hand went to her throat. Her eyes went wide. Hayes turned back to Marcus, his face red, sweat beading on his forehead. "Mr. Webb, is there anything I can get you?" "Anything at all." Marcus finally looked up. His expression was completely neutral. "I'd like to make an announcement to the passengers. Hand me the PA system microphone." "Of course," Sir Hayes said immediately. "The system is at the front galley." Marcus unbuckled his seatbelt. He stood slowly, deliberately. He walked past a frozen, terrified Victoria Sterling, her face drained of color, her hands trembling at her sides. He picked up the handset. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus's voice echoed through the entire aircraft from the first-class cabin all the way to row 55 in economy. "This is Marcus Webb speaking. I am the new majority owner of Sovereign Sky Airways as of approximately 3 minutes ago." A murmur rippled through the plane like a wave. Passengers sat up straighter. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. "We experienced a slight delay in service due to a personnel issue in first class. I want to apologize for the disturbance. To make up for it, I am authorizing a full refund for every passenger on this flight today. Yes, even economy. And drinks are on the house for the remainder of the flight." A cheer erupted from the back of the plane, loud and genuine, the sound of economy passengers realizing they'd just gotten a free international flight. Marcus's voice hardened. "However, we have a serious issue regarding staff conduct. Ms. Sterling, please come to the front of the cabin." Victoria couldn't move. She was paralyzed, her legs locked, her mind racing. Every eye in first class was on her. Elena, standing beside her, gently nudged her elbow. "You have to go," Elena whispered. Victoria walked forward on shaking legs. Her heels clicked against the floor, each step feeling like a mile. She stood before Marcus, the man she had slapped, the man she had mocked for wearing a hoodie. Marcus lowered the microphone so his next words would only be heard by her and Captain Hayes. "You have a choice, Victoria," he whispered, his voice cold and precise. "We have 6 hours to New York. You can spend them in the jump seat, silent and invisible. Or we can discuss the forensic accounting audit my team is currently running on the duty-free cash cards you've been managing for the last 2 years. Victoria's face went white. Whiter than the clouds outside the window. I don't know what you mean," she stammered. "I think you do," Marcus said. "My team found discrepancies. Large ones. You didn't just slap a billionaire, Victoria. You drew attention to a criminal enterprise." He turned to Captain Hayes. "Captain, have the authorities meet us at the gate. Not for me. For her." Marcus returned to seat 1A and buckled in. He opened his laptop, which had been charging courtesy of a portable battery that a very nervous junior flight attendant had brought him without being asked. Arthur was already sending files through their encrypted connection documents, populating on Marcus's screen faster than he could read them. What Marcus had said to Victoria started as a bluff, a calculated guess based on patterns he'd seen in other failing airlines. When cash flow gets tight, when management stops paying attention, when oversight disappears, crews start finding creative ways to supplement their income. Duty-free cash cards were a classic target. Flight attendants collected payments in cash, supposedly logged the sales, supposedly deposited the money. But in practice, oversight was minimal. Tracking was sloppy, and temptation was high. Marcus had thrown out the accusation to see Victoria's reaction. And her face had told him everything he needed to know. But now Arthur was finding actual evidence. Marcus Arthur's voice came through his noise-canceling headphones. "It's not just duty-free perfume. It's much worse. Tell me." I cross-referenced her flight logs with cargo manifests. Every time she flies the London to New York route, there's a discrepancy in the weight of the galley carts. It's small, maybe 5 kilos per cart, but it's consistent. We're talking about dozens of flights over 3 years. Marcus leaned back in his seat, his mind already calculating. "Smuggling." "Looks like it," Arthur confirmed. "And she's not doing it alone. Captain Hayes is the pilot on 80% of her London-New York flights." "That's not coincidence, Marcus. That's coordination." Marcus's eyes flicked toward the cockpit door. The captain wasn't just a bully who'd sided with his crew member. He was an accomplice in something much larger. "What are they moving?" Marcus asked. Arthur paused. Marcus could hear him typing furiously. High-end electronics components, computer chips, rare earth materials used in advanced manufacturing. Street value is hard to pin down exactly, but we're talking hundreds of thousands per flight, maybe more. They're avoiding customs, avoiding tariffs, and selling on the black market in New York. Marcus smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the cold, predatory smile of a man who'd just found exactly what he was looking for. "So, I didn't just buy an airline," Marcus said quietly. "I bought a logistics company being used for a smuggling operation. Essentially," Arthur said. "You want me to keep digging? Yes. And Arthur, get me the FBI. I want federal agents waiting at JFK when we land. This isn't a company matter anymore. This is criminal. Already on it. I'll contact Agent Miller. He still owes you for the Detroit situation. Good. And Arthur, I need visual confirmation. They have the goods on this plane right now. If we land and they manage to switch the carts or offload them to a corrupt handler, we lose the evidence. You need to check the carts, Arthur said. But Marcus, you can't just walk into the galley and start rummaging through inventory. Hayes will tackle you and claim you're trying to hijack the plane. Marcus looked around the first-class cabin. Most passengers had returned to their movies or their sleep, the drama seemingly over. Victoria was nowhere to be seen, presumably hiding in the crew rest area at the back of the plane where Marcus had ordered her to stay. But Elena Rodriguez was in the front galley nervously organizing supplies, her hands moving with the kind of anxious energy that comes from not knowing what to do with yourself. I have an idea, Marcus said. Marcus unbuckled and walked to the galley. Elena jumped when she saw him, nearly dropping the stack of napkins she was folding. Mr. Webb, she said quickly, can I get you anything? Another water? Something to eat. Elena, Marcus said, his voice low and steady. I need you to do something very difficult, and I need you to trust me. Elena looked at his eyes. They were hard, yes, but there was something honest in them, something that made her want to listen, even though every instinct screamed that getting involved would cost her everything. What is it? She asked. The cart labeled DF4. Marcus said. The one that's usually locked until landing. I need to see inside it. Elena's face went pale. Sir, that's against regulation. Only the senior flight attendant has the key. Victoria has it on a chain around her neck. She never takes it off. Marcus nodded slowly. I own the regulations now, Elena. And if we don't open that cart, Victoria and Captain Hayes are going to walk away with millions of dollars in stolen company property. Elena's eyes widened. Her mouth opened slightly. She'd suspected Victoria was shady. The way Victoria always dismissed the junior crew during inventory counts. The way she'd snap at anyone who touched certain carts. The way she'd take personal phone calls in the galley and speak in hushed, urgent tones. But smuggling criminal enterprise, I can't get the key, Elena whispered. Victoria would know immediately. Marcus waited. He didn't push. He just looked at her with patient expectation. Elena bit her lip. But the lock on DF4 has been broken for months, she said finally. Victoria just puts a zip tie on it to make it look secured. She cuts it right before landing. Marcus smiled. It was the first genuine smile he'd given since boarding. Show me. Elena checked the aisle nervously. First class was quiet. Harrington was asleep in 1B, his newspaper folded on his lap. The other passengers were lost in movies or books. She pulled the heavy metal cart from its storage slot. It was marked with red tape and a warning label. Do not open. Bonded goods. A single black plastic zip tie secured the latch. Do you have scissors? Marcus asked. Elena reached into the galley drawer and handed him a pair of shears. Marcus snipped the plastic. It fell to the floor with a soft click. He opened the metal door. Inside were the usual duty-free items that passengers expected to see. Perfumes in their glossy boxes, oversized chocolate bars, plush teddy bears, cartons of cigarettes stacked neatly. But Marcus reached past all of that to the bottom tray. He pulled it out carefully. It was heavier than it should have been. Much heavier. Underneath a layer of cigarette cartons hidden beneath a false bottom that looked like part of the cart's structure were 4 small heavy boxes wrapped in gray anti-static foam. Marcus pulled one out and carefully peeled back the tape. Inside was a stack of high-density graphic processing units, the kind used for advanced artificial intelligence computing and cryptocurrency mining. Each unit was about the size of a deck of cards, but worth thousands of dollars. Street value on these, Marcus murmured. Turning one over in his hand is roughly $50,000 per box, and I count at least 20 boxes in this cart. Elena's hand flew to her mouth. "That's $1 million?" she whispered. Elena's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. "Oh my God," she breathed. "That's why she never lets us touch this cart. She always says it's fragile perfume that breaks easily." Marcus carefully set the GPU back in its foam padding. "Take pictures," he ordered. "Right now. Make sure your phone's date stamp is visible." Elena pulled out her phone with trembling hands and snapped 3 clear photos from different angles, making sure to capture the cart number, the contraband, and the surrounding context. "Now put it back," Marcus said. "Exactly as you found it. Do you have another black zip tie? We have a whole bag of them in the supply drawer." Elena worked quickly, her hands shaking but precise, resealing the evidence exactly as they'd found it. She pulled out a fresh zip tie and secured the latch, pulling it tight until it clicked. As she was sliding the cart back into its storage slot, the cockpit door opened with a sudden click. Marcus spun around instinctively, putting his body between Elena and whoever was coming out. It was Captain Hayes. He'd come out for a bathroom break, or maybe to check on the cabin, or maybe just to reassert some sense of control over a situation that had spiraled completely out of his hands. He froze when he saw Marcus standing in the galley. "What are you doing in my galley?" Hayes demanded, his voice sharp with suspicion and barely suppressed panic. Marcus didn't flinch. He reached calmly for a bottle of water sitting on the counter. "Getting a drink," Captain Marcus said evenly. "Your service is a bit slow today, probably due to the personnel changes." Hayes stepped closer, his imposing frame filling the small galley space. He looked over Marcus's shoulder at Elena, who was sliding the cart back into place. The fresh zip tie gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Hayes stared at it for a long moment, but he didn't notice. He was too focused on intimidation, too focused on trying to reassert his authority. "You might have bought some stocks," Webb Hayes sneered, lowering his voice so the sleeping passengers wouldn't hear. "But up here, I am the law. Federal aviation regulations state that the pilot in command has absolute authority over this aircraft. If I say you're interfering with a crew member, you go to jail. It doesn't matter how rich you are." Marcus took a slow sip of water. He capped the bottle carefully. "Captain, let me give you some financial advice," Marcus said quietly. "When you're in a hole, stop digging." "I don't need your advice," Hayes snapped. "I think you do," Marcus said. "You see, I'm looking at the fuel consumption logs. We're burning heavy. Heavier than the passenger load would suggest. Almost as if we're carrying extra cargo that's not on the manifest." Hayes's face twitched. It was a microscopic reaction, barely visible, a tiny contraction of the muscles around his eyes. But Marcus saw it. He saw the panic flash behind the captain's eyes. "We have a headwind." Hayes lied. "Now sit down." He pushed past Marcus, grabbed a coffee from the dispenser with hands that shook just slightly, and retreated back into the cockpit. The door slammed shut. Marcus turned to Elena. She was gripping the edge of the counter, her knuckles white. "He knows," she whispered. "He suspects something. He suspects Marcus corrected. But he's trapped. He can't dump the cargo. We're over the Atlantic Ocean. He can't land anywhere else because I'm watching the flight path, and he can't intimidate me into silence. He's running out of sky, Elena, and he knows it." Marcus returned to seat 1A and opened his laptop. He pulled up a secure chat window with Arthur. Evidence secured Marcus typed. "Photographic proof of smuggling. GPS chips, high-value electronics. Captain is rattled but trapped. Contact Port Authority Police and FBI at JFK. Bring K-9 units for drug sweep. Specifically request Agent Miller. He owes me." Arthur's response came back almost immediately. "On it. Miller is already mobilizing. He says, quote, 'About time you gave me something interesting to do.' Also, Marcus, you need to know the press has gotten wind of the Billionaire buys airline mid-flight story. It's trending on Twitter. #slapback is the #1 hashtag globally. You're going to have a welcoming committee when you land." Marcus allowed himself a small smile. "Good," he typed back. "Leverage." He closed the chat and leaned back in his seat, looking out the window at the endless blue ocean below. They had 4 more hours until landing. 4 hours for Victoria to stew in terror in the crew rest area. 4 hours for Hayes to sweat in the cockpit, knowing he was caught but not knowing exactly how much evidence existed. 4 hours for the trap to tighten. Marcus pulled out a book from his backpack, a paperback thriller he'd bought in the airport. He opened it to the first page. He didn't actually read a single word. But the act of appearing calm, of appearing unbothered, of appearing like he was simply passing time on a routine flight, sent a message to everyone watching. He was in control, completely, utterly, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. The remaining 6 hours of Flight 447 were the longest of Victoria Sterling's life. Marcus had ordered her to the crew rest area, a small curtained-off bunk at the very back of the aircraft, normally used for flight attendants on long-haul routes to grab a few hours of sleep. It was cramped, dark, and isolated. She was to stay there, silent, invisible, not to speak to anyone. Victoria sat on the narrow bunk, her knees pulled up to her chest, her carefully styled hair coming undone, her makeup smudging as she pressed her hands against her face. She knew what was in the carts. She knew exactly what Marcus was talking about when he mentioned the forensic audit. It had started small 3 years ago, just a little skimming off the duty-free sales, $20 here, $50 there. Easy money that no one noticed because oversight was non-existent and accounting was sloppy. But then Captain Hayes had approached her with a different proposition. His wife Linda owned a logistics company. They had connections in London and New York. They could move high-value items that people wanted to avoid customs fees on. Computer components, rare materials, luxury watches. All Victoria had to do was load the items into the duty-free carts before the flight, make sure no one touched them during the journey, and hand them off to a contact in New York after landing. $40,000 per flight. It was more money than she made in 3 months of regular work. It was enough to pay off her credit cards, to afford the apartment in a nice neighborhood, to buy the designer clothes and the expensive perfume, and maintain the image of success she'd carefully cultivated. She told herself it wasn't really hurting anyone. The airline was struggling anyway. Management didn't care. No one would ever notice. Except someone had noticed. Marcus Webb had noticed. And now she was trapped in a small, dark room at 36,000 feet with nowhere to run and 4 hours until the FBI met her at the gate. She thought about crying, but her eyes were dry. Terror had moved past tears into something colder. She thought about trying to destroy the evidence, but the carts were locked in the galley, and she'd been ordered not to leave the crew rest area. She thought about calling Hayes in the cockpit. But what could he do? He was trapped too, flying a plane full of witnesses toward a destination where federal agents were already waiting. So she sat in the dark and waited for her life to end. Meanwhile, the dynamic in first class had shifted completely. Charles Harrington, the man in seat 1B who'd witnessed the slap, was now chatting amiably with Marcus whenever he was awake. He'd ordered a cognac from Elena and was swirling it slowly in his glass. I knew the service was slipping on. Sovereign Sky Harrington said, shaking his head. But I didn't realize the financials were that bad. Missed earnings 3 quarters in a row. The financials are salvageable, Marcus said, typing something on his laptop. The culture is the problem. It's rotten from the head down. You're going to fire the whole executive team, aren't you? Harrington asked with something like admiration. Anyone who enabled this, yes, Marcus confirmed. We'll rebuild with people who understand that respect isn't optional. Harrington raised his glass in a small salute. Good luck. You're going to need it. Marcus called Elena over. She approached nervously, still processing everything that had happened in the last 2 hours. Elena, Marcus said gently, Sit down for a second. Elena glanced around, then perched on the edge of the armrest of the empty seat across the aisle. How long have you been flying? Marcus asked. 4 months, sir. I'm still on probation, and why didn't you speak up when Captain Hayes came out? You saw what really happened. Elena looked down at her hands, twisting them together in her lap. Victoria is my supervisor, she said quietly. She writes my evaluations. If I speak against her, I fail probation. I lose my job. I have $60,000 in student loans and rent due in a week. I couldn't. She trailed off, her voice breaking slightly. Marcus nodded slowly. You're not on probation anymore, he said. Elena looked up confused. Sir, I'm promoting you, effective immediately. You're the acting senior flight attendant for this aircraft. You're in charge of the cabin for the remainder of this flight. But I don't know the protocols for... You know how to treat people with respect, don't you? Marcus asked. Yes, sir, Elena said. Then you know the protocols, Marcus said. Run the cabin. Make sure everyone is comfortable and safe. And bring me another sparkling water, if you can find one. Elena's face broke into the first genuine smile Marcus had seen from her. We have plenty of sparkling, sir, she said. It was in the bottom cart all along. As Elena stood up and moved through the cabin with new confidence, Marcus turned his attention back to his screen. Arthur was still sending files. Emails between Victoria and a company called Skyline Logistics, invoices for consulting fees that had no corresponding work product, bank transfers to a Cayman Islands account that traced back to a shell company partially owned by Linda Hayes, the captain's wife. The web was intricate, but Arthur was untangling it thread by thread. Marcus opened a new document and began drafting a memo to the executive team at Sovereign Sky. Well, his executive team now. The memo was titled, Immediate Operational Changes. It was 3 pages long and included everything from mandatory bias training to new oversight protocols for duty-free sales to a complete restructuring of the flight crew evaluation system. He was rebuilding the airline in real time at 36,000 feet. 2 hours before landing, Captain Hayes couldn't take it anymore. He'd been sitting in the cockpit, hands gripping the yoke, even though the autopilot was flying the plane, his mind racing through scenarios and escape routes and legal defenses, all of which crumbled the moment he examined them closely. He called Victoria on the internal crew line. "Meet me in the galley," he hissed when she answered. "Now." Victoria slipped out of the crew rest area and made her way forward, moving quickly through the dimmed economy cabin where most passengers were sleeping or watching movies. She met Hayes in the rear galley, away from first class, where they could talk without being overheard. "What do we do?" Victoria whispered urgently, her voice raw with panic. "He knows Roger. He has photos. He called the FBI." Hayes's face was red and blotchy, his uniform rumpled sweat staining his collar. "We stick to the story," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "We say he planted it. He's a billionaire with a grudge. It's our word against his. He has logs, Roger. He hacked into the company system. He has our flight records matched with cargo manifests." "Then we delete the logs," Hayes said desperately. "I still have administrator access to the—" He stopped mid-sentence, his face going pale. "He already locked me out," Hayes whispered. "When I tried to access the cargo manifest earlier, it said administrator lockout." Victoria stared at him. "We're finished," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Hayes didn't respond. He just turned and walked back to the cockpit like a man heading to his own execution. Marcus watched Hayes stumble back toward the cockpit on the cabin camera feed that he'd accessed through the airline's maintenance system. Arthur had given him full access to everything. He opened the intercom system, patching his phone directly into the cockpit speakers. Hayes was just sitting down in the captain's seat when Marcus's voice filled the small space. "Captain Hayes." Marcus said calmly, "I want to make something very clear." Hayes spun around, looking at the speaker grill like it had personally betrayed him. "You have approximately 1 hour and 40 minutes until wheels down at JFK." Marcus continued, You can spend that time concocting elaborate lies that will add perjury and obstruction charges to your sentence. Or you can fly this plane safely, land it smoothly, and accept your fate with some dignity. Hayes opened his mouth to respond, but Marcus wasn't finished. If you attempt to sabotage this aircraft, if you attempt to harm any passengers or crew, if you do anything except fly this plane professionally to its destination, I will make it my personal mission to ensure you never see sunlight again. I will spend every dollar of my fortune making sure you rot in the deepest, darkest federal prison in America. Marcus paused, letting that sink in. But if you land this plane safely, if you cooperate with the authorities, if you show even a shred of the professionalism you swore an oath to uphold when you earned those captain's wings, then maybe, just maybe, you'll get a cell with a window. The choice is yours, Captain. Choose wisely. Marcus ended the connection. In the cockpit, Hayes slumped in his seat, all the fight draining out of him. He looked at his co-pilot, David Park, who'd been sitting in terrified silence through the entire ordeal. "Resume navigation," Hayes whispered. "Take us to New York." Park nodded and took the controls, his hands steady, his face professionally neutral, but his eyes said everything. He'd never respect Hayes again. The final hour of the flight passed in eerie calm. Elena ran the first-class cabin with quiet competence, refilling drinks, offering snacks, making sure everyone was comfortable. Passengers in economy had heard rumors through the cabin, whispers passing from row to row about what happened in first class, about the billionaire who bought the airline, about the flight attendant who was going to be arrested. The woman in row 3 who'd been filming had already uploaded her video to Twitter. It had 3 million views and counting. Charles Harrington ordered another cognac and raised it toward Marcus. "You've had quite a day," he said. "It's not over yet," Marcus replied. Harrington chuckled. "No, I suppose it's not." Marcus closed his laptop and looked out the window. The sun was setting over the Atlantic, painting the clouds in shades of orange and pink and gold. It was beautiful in the way that only nature at scale can be beautiful. In a few minutes, they'd begin their descent into New York. The city would appear on the horizon, a glittering mass of lights and ambition and millions of lives being lived. And somewhere down there, federal agents were preparing to board this plane and arrest 2 people who thought they were untouchable. Marcus allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Not happiness, not joy. Just the cold, calculated satisfaction of a plan executed perfectly. He'd been underestimated his entire life. Underestimated because of his skin color. Underestimated because he didn't flaunt his wealth. Underestimated because he chose to move quietly through the world. But being underestimated was a weapon. And today he'd used it to devastating effect. The seatbelt sign dinged on. The captain's voice, hollow and defeated, came over the speakers. "Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for landing." Marcus buckled his seatbelt and leaned back. The real show was about to begin. The descent into New York was beautiful in the way that only twilight over a massive city can be. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky painted in deep purples and blues, and the city lights were beginning to twinkle like diamonds scattered across black velvet. From his window seat in 1A, Marcus could see the entire sprawl of New York City laid out below. Manhattan's towers clustered together like stalagmites, the bridges spanning the rivers like delicate threads of light, the organized grid of streets glowing with the movement of millions of lives. For Victoria Sterling and Captain Robert Hayes, that same skyline must have looked like prison bars closing in. The seatbelt sign chimed throughout the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Hayes's voice came through the speakers, flat and emotionless. "We are beginning our final descent into John F. Kennedy International Airport. Please return to your seats and ensure your seatbelts are fastened. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for landing." His voice cracked slightly on the last word. In first class, Elena moved through the rows with professional efficiency, checking that tray tables were up and seats were in their upright positions. When she reached Marcus, she paused. "Mr. Webb," she said quietly. "What's going to happen when we land?" Justice Marcus said simply. "Just stay close to me when we deplane. You're a witness, not a suspect. The FBI will need your statement, but Agent Miller is a good man. He'll treat you fairly." Elena nodded, her face pale but determined. The plane banked slightly, lining up with the runway. The landing gear deployed with a heavy mechanical thunk that resonated through the fuselage. Through his window, Marcus could see something that made him smile. The tarmac below wasn't empty. Instead of the usual ground crew and baggage handlers, there were at least a dozen vehicles clustered near the remote parking area where they were clearly being directed. Police cruisers with lights flashing, black SUVs with government plates, a K-9 unit van, and standing in the center of it all, a tall figure in a dark windbreaker with FBI emblazoned across the back in bright yellow letters. Agent Miller had brought the cavalry. The wheels touched the concrete with a screech and a thump that always sounded more violent than it actually was. A smattering of applause broke out in the economy cabin, the usual relief of safe landing mixed with the excitement of the free flight refund Marcus had promised. In first class, there was only silence. The plane taxied, but instead of heading toward the terminal and the jet bridges where passengers normally deplaned, it turned onto a remote taxiway and rolled to a stop on an isolated section of tarmac. "Why are we stopping here?" Charles Harrington asked, looking out his window at the sea of flashing lights. "Customs inspection," Marcus said, unbuckling his seatbelt and standing. "Everyone, please remain in your seats. This won't take long." The main cabin door opened with a pressurized hiss, but it wasn't a ground crew member or a jet bridge operator who appeared in the doorway. It was a team of 6 federal agents in windbreakers, 3 marked FBI, 3 marked CBP for Customs and Border Protection. Leading them was Agent Miller, a tall man with a stern face, graying hair cut military short, and the kind of presence that made people instinctively step aside. "Ladies and gentlemen," Miller announced in a voice that carried through the entire aircraft, "please remain seated. This is a federal law enforcement operation. We will have you on your way shortly." He walked directly to seat 1A, his expression neutral, but his eyes sharp. "Mr. Webb," he said, "you sure know how to make my job interesting." Marcus stood and extended his hand. Miller shook it firmly. "I try to keep you on your toes," Marcus said. "The suspects are in the cockpit. The evidence is in galley cart DF4 bottom tray. And I'd suggest you seize their personal phones immediately before they have a chance to destroy any communications." Miller nodded to his team. "Go." 4 agents moved toward the cockpit with practiced efficiency. One knocked on the reinforced door. FBI. "Open the door, Captain Hayes." There was a long pause. Then the lock clicked and the door swung open. Hayes stepped out first. He'd removed his captain's hat and held it in his hands like a shield. His face was gray, his eyes hollow. He looked like a man who'd aged 10 years in 6 hours. He didn't resist when the agents moved forward. He just held out his wrists for the handcuffs with the resignation of someone who knew the fight was already over. "Captain Robert Hayes," an agent said formally, "you are under arrest for smuggling conspiracy to defraud and assault on a passenger. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Hayes said nothing. He just stared at the floor as they led him past Marcus, past the first-class passengers who watched in stunned silence, past Elena, who looked away. As he reached the door, Hayes stopped for just a moment and looked back at Marcus. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Marcus's expression didn't change. "No, you're not. You're sorry you got caught. There's a difference." Hayes's shoulders slumped, and he let the agents lead him down the stairs to a waiting police vehicle. Victoria was different. When 2 agents went to the crew rest area to retrieve her, she came out fighting. "They're lying," she screamed, her voice shrill and panicked. "He's the criminal. He assaulted me. This is a setup." She was dragged through the economy cabin, her heels catching on the carpet, her carefully styled hair completely undone, mascara running down her face in black streaks. Passengers pulled out their phones. The clicking of camera shutters filled the cabin like rain. "Ma'am, you need to calm down," one of the agents said firmly. "I'm calm," Victoria shrieked, which was clearly untrue. When they reached first class, she saw Marcus standing beside Agent Miller. Something in her snapped. She lunged toward him, trying to break free from the agent's grip, trying to reach him, to hurt him, to make him pay for ruining her life. "You arrogant bastard!" she screamed, spittle flying from her lips. "You ruined my life. I hope you rot in hell." Marcus didn't flinch. He just looked at her with something that might have been pity. "You ruined your own life, Victoria," he said quietly. "I just turned on the lights." The agents pulled her back, snapping handcuffs onto her wrists. She was still screaming as they led her down the stairs, her voice echoing across the tarmac. "You're making a mistake. I didn't do anything." He planted it. "Check the cameras. He's lying." But her voice faded as they pushed her into the back of a police cruiser and closed the door. The flashing lights illuminated her face one last time through the window, a mask of pure, unadulterated regret and terror. And then she was gone. Inside the plane, Agent Miller's team moved with practiced efficiency. 2 agents photographed the galley cart DF4 from every angle before opening it. A K9 unit was brought in a German Shepherd that immediately alerted on the cart, sitting down and looking up at its handler with the pride of a job well done. Miller himself pulled out the boxes wrapped in anti-static foam, examining them carefully. "Computer chips," he confirmed. "High-end G+. Street value is going to be over $1 million for this one flight alone. If they've been doing this for 3 years..." He let out a low whistle. "You just handed us the biggest smuggling bust we've had in 2 years, Webb." Marcus shrugged slightly. "I just wanted a peaceful flight, Miller. They made it complicated." The passengers were finally allowed to deplane, filing out in stunned silence past the federal agents and the evidence bags and the crime scene tape that was being strung up around the galley. Elena walked close to Marcus as they exited the aircraft. At the bottom of the stairs, Agent Miller stopped her gently. "Ms. Rodriguez, I'm going to need a statement from you. You're not under arrest. You're not in trouble. You're a witness who helped us. But I need you to walk me through everything you saw." Elena nodded, her voice steady despite her obvious nerves. "Of course, Agent Miller." Miller looked at Marcus. "You too, Webb. We need your statement for the record." "Not a problem," Marcus said. "But first I need you to make sure the press gets the full story. This wasn't about revenge. This was about accountability. I don't want the airline's reputation destroyed because of a few corrupt employees." Miller nodded. "We'll make sure the narrative is accurate. Trust me." Marcus walked through the jet bridge into the terminal and was immediately hit by a wall of camera flashes and shouted questions. The press had descended on JFK like locusts, dozens of reporters with cameras and microphones, and the hungry expressions of people who'd just been handed the story of the year. "Mr. Webb. Is it true you bought the airline mid-flight, Mr. Webb? What will happen to Sovereign Sky Airways, Mr. Webb? Was this about revenge for being slapped?" Marcus stopped in front of the cameras. He didn't smile. He didn't play to the crowd. He just stood there with the calm authority of a man who was used to being listened to. "This wasn't about revenge," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the terminal. "This was about accountability. I was assaulted by an employee who decided based purely on my appearance that I didn't belong in a seat I had paid for. That's unacceptable in any context, but especially in an industry built on service. "What's next for the airline?" a reporter shouted. "Sovereign Sky will be restructured and rebranded as Web Skyline." Marcus said, "We will rebuild this company from the culture up. New policies, new training, new leadership, all centered on one simple principle: respect for every passenger regardless of what they look like, what they wear, or where they sit." And the employees who were arrested. Victoria Sterling and Captain Robert Hayes are facing federal charges for smuggling, conspiracy, and assault. The justice system will handle them appropriately. My focus is on the 3,000 employees who showed up to work every day with integrity and professionalism. They deserve better leadership, and they're going to get it. Marcus walked through the crowd without taking any more questions. The reporters parted like water, their cameras following him all the way to the exit. Behind him, news chyrons were already updating on the terminal televisions: "Billionaire buys airline after being slapped. Exposes $1 million smuggling ring. FBI makes arrests." Marcus and Elena spent the next 2 hours in a private conference room at JFK, giving their statements to Agent Miller and his team. Elena went first, walking them through everything she'd seen: the slap, Victoria's lie, Hayes's immediate bias, the phone call that changed everything, the evidence in the cart. Her voice was steady, her account detailed and credible. When she finished, Miller closed his notebook. "Ms. Rodriguez, you did the right thing. I know it wasn't easy. I know you risked your job, but you helped us take down a smuggling operation that's been running for at least 3 years. That takes courage." Elena's eyes got shiny, but she blinked the tears back. "I just couldn't stay silent anymore," she said quietly. When it was Marcus's turn, he provided a concise timeline of events backed up by the photos on his phone, the recordings he'd made, and the financial documents Arthur had compiled. Miller shook his head in amazement. "You built an entire criminal case in 6 hours at 36,000 feet, he said. "That's either brilliant or insane." "Probably both," Marcus admitted. The story dominated the news cycle for 3 days straight. Victoria Sterling and Captain Robert Hayes were both denied bail. The prosecution argued they were flight risks with international connections and access to offshore accounts. The judge agreed. They sat in federal detention awaiting trial on charges that could bring 20 years in prison. Hayes's wife, Linda, was also arrested when investigators traced the shell companies back to her. She received a separate indictment for money laundering and conspiracy. She was offered 12 years in a plea deal which her lawyer advised her to take. Victoria's apartment was searched. Investigators found over $200,000 in cash hidden in shoeboxes in her closet, along with luxury items she'd purchased with her smuggling profits: designer handbags, expensive jewelry, clothes with the tags still on them. The photos of her being let out in an orange jumpsuit, face, haggard makeup, smeared hair in disarray went viral. She shielded her face from the cameras, but they caught her anyway, broadcasting her fall from grace to millions of people. Marcus didn't waste time. Within 48 hours of landing, he'd assembled a new executive team for what was now officially Web Skyline Airways. The press conference was held at the airline's headquarters in London, a modern glass building overlooking the Thames. Marcus stood behind a podium, dressed in a sharp navy suit, looking every bit the CEO he'd always been, but had chosen to hide on that flight. "Today marks the beginning of a new era for this airline," Marcus said. "We are implementing immediate changes across every level of operations." Behind him, a screen displayed the new initiative's 20% pay increase for all non-executive staff, mandatory bias and sensitivity training for all employees, new anonymous reporting system for crew members, complete restructuring of the evaluation system, passenger Bill of Rights prominently displayed in every cabin, new company motto, "Respect in every row." But the biggest announcement came next. "I'm pleased to introduce our new Director of Customer Experience," Marcus said, gesturing to the side of the stage. "Elena Rodriguez." Elena walked out in a business suit, her dark hair pulled back professionally, her face composed but clearly emotional. She was 26 years old and had been flying for 4 months. Now she was an airline executive. The audience applauded. Cameras flashed. Elena approached the microphone. 4 months ago, I started this job terrified of making mistakes. She said, her voice clear and strong. I was taught to stay quiet, to defer to senior crew, to never question authority. But staying quiet allows injustice to continue. Speaking up cost me my sense of security. But it gave me something more important, my integrity. She looked directly at the cameras. At Web Skyline, we will never punish people for doing the right thing. We will create a culture where every employee, from the newest hire to the CEO, can speak truth without fear. Where passengers are treated with dignity regardless of their appearance. Where respect is not optional, it's mandatory. The press conference ended with a standing ovation. The transformation of Web Skyline became a case study in business schools across the world. Customer satisfaction ratings jumped 40% in the first quarter. Employee retention improved dramatically. The anonymous reporting system flagged and resolved dozens of smaller issues before they became major problems. Industry publications called it the turnaround of the decade. Forbes featured Elena on their cover with the headline, "From Probation to Executive, the Flight Attendant Who Stood Up." Victoria Sterling and Robert Hayes both accepted plea deals to avoid trial. Victoria received 18 years in federal prison. Hayes received 20. Linda Hayes got 12. The day Victoria was sentenced, she was led into the courtroom in shackles and an orange jumpsuit. Her blonde hair had gone gray at the roots. She'd lost weight. She looked nothing like the polished, elegant woman who'd commanded first class with such confidence. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, she stood and looked directly at the camera in the back of the courtroom. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. But it was too late. The words were empty. The apology was for herself, not for the people she'd hurt. The judge sentenced her, the gavel fell, and she was led away. She would be 56 years old when she was eligible for parole. Marcus Webb stood in the first-class cabin of a Webb Skyline aircraft that wasn't flying anywhere. It was parked at the gate in London Heathrow, undergoing pre-flight checks before an evening departure to Tokyo. The cabin was empty except for him and Elena, who'd flown in from New York for a quarterly operations review. Marcus walked slowly down the aisle, running his hand over the leather seats, feeling the texture of the new upholstery they'd installed. Everything had been updated. New seats, new lighting, new service protocols. But the most important changes were invisible. He stopped at seat 1A, the seat where it had all started. Elena approached from the galley with her tablet reviewing training completion metrics. All flight crews have completed the new bias certification, she reported. We have 100% compliance across all regions. Initial feedback is actually positive. Most crew members said they appreciated having clear guidelines and felt more confident in handling difficult situations. Marcus nodded, still looking at the seat. "How are they responding to the new reporting system?" he asked. "We've had 43 reports filed in the first 6 months," Elena said. "Most were minor issues that we resolved immediately, but 3 were serious enough that we terminated employees. And the important thing is people feel safe reporting now. They trust that management will actually listen." Marcus sat down in 1A, looked at the spot where Victoria had stood over him. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said, sitting across from him in 1B. "Of course." "That day when she slapped you, why didn't you fight back? Why stay so calm?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. "Because anger would have proven her right," he said finally. "She wanted me to be the threat she imagined. If I'd yelled, if I'd raised my hand, if I'd done anything violent, I would have become the story instead of the injustice. The narrative would have been about an aggressive passenger, not a discriminatory employee." He looked at Elena. "Staying calm wasn't weakness. It was strategy. It gave me control of the narrative. It made her escalate while I stayed measured. and it made sure that when everything came to light there was no ambiguity about who was in the wrong. Elena nodded slowly. You changed an entire airline in 2 minutes. Marcus shook his head. No. Victoria changed it. Her actions exposed a broken culture. I just made sure the consequences matched the offense. That's all accountability really is, Elena. Making sure actions have appropriate outcomes. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the tarmac where planes taxied in the fading afternoon light. You know what I learned from that flight? Marcus said quietly. What? That people judge you in seconds. Your clothes, your skin, your demeanor. They make a decision about your worth before you've said a word. You can't stop them from judging, but you can control how you respond. He turned to face her. I could have gotten angry. Could have sued for millions. Could have destroyed the airline and walked away. But that wouldn't have fixed anything. Real change isn't about punishment. It's about building something better from the ruins. Elena smiled. Well, you've built something remarkable, Mr. Webb. We built something remarkable, Marcus corrected. Never forget that. You took photos when you could have stayed silent. You testified when you could have protected yourself. Change requires people willing to risk something for what's right. They walked toward the exit together, Elena carrying her tablet. Marcus with his hands in his pockets. At the door, Marcus paused and looked back at the empty first-class cabin one last time. Never judge someone by their seat, he said softly, almost to himself. Or their clothes, or their silence. You have no idea what they're capable of. They stepped off the plane into the bright London afternoon. This story stays with me for one simple reason. It proves that dignity doesn't need permission. Marcus Webb didn't ask Victoria Sterling to respect him. He didn't beg Captain Hayes to believe him. He didn't plead with anyone to see his worth. He simply existed in the space he'd earned, and when that space was violated, he responded with the kind of calm power that reshapes entire industries. Here's what I learned watching this unfold. First, your response to disrespect matters more than the disrespect itself. Victoria slapped Marcus. That was her choice, her moment of revealing who she really was. But Marcus's choice was to stay calm, document everything, and turn injustice into institutional change. He could have yelled, could have fought, could have made it about personal revenge. Instead, he made it about accountability. That's not weakness. That's mastery. Second, sometimes the most powerful move is letting people underestimate you. Marcus walked onto that plane in a hoodie and jeans, knowing exactly what assumptions people would make. He could have worn his wealth like armor. He chose not to, because the test wasn't about proving himself. It was about revealing who they were when they thought he had no power. And they showed him everything. Third, real change doesn't come from destroying people. It comes from building better systems. Marcus didn't just ruin Victoria and Hayes. He restructured an entire airline. He promoted Elena. He created policies. He turned one moment of injustice into decades of dignity for millions of future passengers. That's legacy. So let me ask you this. When someone underestimates you, do you waste energy proving them wrong in the moment? Or do you stay quiet, stay strategic, and prove them wrong in ways they'll never forget? Marcus Webb chose the second path. And in 2 minutes, he didn't just buy an airline. He bought the power to make sure what happened to him never happens to anyone else. Remember this. Respect isn't something you beg for. It's something you command through how you carry yourself when people refuse to give it. Victoria thought Marcus didn't belong in first class. Turned out he owned the whole plane. Stay dignified. Stay strategic. Never let anyone's assumptions become your limitations. If this story moved you drop a comment and let me know what you would have done in Marcus's position. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about justice, accountability, and people who refused to stay silent when the world tried to make them invisible. Thanks for watching. Fly safe. And remember, the person you underestimate today might be signing your paycheck tomorrow.